So nutrition during childhood. When we last left off, we were looking at nutrition during infancy, which is the first 12 months of life. Okay, now we're looking at the second 12 months, essentially, from 1 year on. Okay, and your text talks about nutrition during different stages of childhood. We talk about toddlers, and then what's called preschool age, and then school age children, which segues then into adolescence and adulthood. Okay? And when we talked about the infant diet, remember it was kind of surprising to learn how high in fat that diet was. Remember, breast milk is almost 55% fat. Okay, that's a lot higher than the typical adult diet is. And you can see that as the baby progresses in age, that's about 9 months maybe on the left-hand side there, okay, and then moving into the second year of life, kids definitely lean out, okay. We say, you hear sometimes parents talking about kids losing their baby fat, okay. The percentage of fat drops significantly in the body of an infant compared to the body of a toddler, going from somewhere around 35% down to even less than 10% body fat. Okay, as the kids are growing, the weight that they're putting on is more muscle and lean mass than it is fat. So when it comes to meal planning for the child, okay, we're at the period now where the kids are almost totally off of formula or breast milk. We recommend exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life if possible. And then we start incorporating the weaning foods. Remember, the first one is iron-fortified rice cereal. But then from then on, towards about the end of the first year of life, kids should really be eating exactly what the parents eat, just smaller versions and finger foods if at all possible. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit about some child feeding strategies today. Some of the basic tips for meal planning. And it might not sound like a big surprise to you, but for many parents, they're shocked to learn exactly how much sugar their kids are eating. Many parents actually have no idea how much sugar their kids are eating. We as adults have a discretionary calorie budget each day. Remember, if you eat about 2,000 calories, you can get away with eating about 250 of those from discretionary calories. That's for adults. Okay, 250 calories discretionary. And that's things like alcohol or premium ice cream or butter if you want it. Okay? But kids only get about 100 discretionary calories a day. And if you think about a lot of the foods that are marketed directly to kids, things like high sugar cereals and things like Go-Gurt, which are packaged yogurt that's mostly sugar, okay, those foods oftentimes will have more than 100 calories worth of sugar in 1 or 2 servings. So it's important to remember that it's not just candy and sweets, but many of the packaged foods, especially those that are marketed to kids, have a lot of added sugars. And parents are surprised to learn that, I thought that was a healthy food for my kid. Well, yes, plain non-fat yogurt is healthy for your kids, but if the first ingredient in the yogurt product is sugar, okay, that's of course not that healthful of a product. We're concerned about choking in small kids as well. Okay, some foods that are considered to be choking risks, hot dogs cut in coin shapes. Okay, you'll see different things in different references. Some say no hot dogs at all, usually due in large part to the nitrates and the different preservatives. But from a choking standpoint, you don't want to cut hot dogs in coin shape because that's the perfect size to asphyxiate the small child. Okay? Instead, cut them in matchstick shapes. Okay, so hot dogs are okay for kids to eat if they're cut in matchstick and not coin shape. Grapes are a choking risk. You usually see parents cut grapes in halves or quarters before they'll give it to the kid. Peanut butter in globs. You see lots of parents who don't realize that it's not really until, well into the second year of life that kids have fully developed the swallowing capacity to push peanut butter into their esophagus. So little kids should not be left unattended with peanut butter. Some parents, if they're sitting there watching it, they'll see if their baby or their child can handle the peanut butter. But you really should never just give peanut butter and walk out of the room because it really could cause the child to aspirate. Hard pieces of raw fruits and vegetables. Hard candies, think of things like Jolly Ranchers and Lifesavers. Those are really inappropriate for small children. Okay? And then popcorn, depending upon the size of the kernel, could also be a choking risk. It's also important to note that kids can't get all of their nutrition needs in 3 meals a day. You work with some parents who come from an era where they say healthy nutrition is you eat 3 times a day and you don't eat in between meals, no snacking. Okay, for adults that might work. But for kids, in order for them to meet their nutrition needs, their stomachs are so small that there's no way they're going to meet their nutrient needs in 3 meals alone. Kids need more like 5 or 6 meals and snacks a day. When it comes to calories, Okay, the more active a child is, makes sense, the more calories that he or she needs. Let's take a look at, let's say, an active 7-year-old girl. An active 7-year-old girl needs about 1,800 calories a day. Now, you and I as an adult, if we're low active, might need as few as 1,800 calories a day. You might actually have similar needs to that of a 7-year-old. Again, keeping in mind that due to their anatomy, they're much smaller sized stomachs, no way they're going to get all that nutrition in 3 meals. They've got to have meals and snacks 5 or 6 times a day usually. These are recommendations from mypyramid.gov/kids. And if you go to mypyramid.gov/kids, there's lots of really good info on that page for parents about how to figure out how many calories the kids need at a certain age, and then also what constitutes sedentary or active. Based on how many hours of play a day, you can look it up to see, is my kid sedentary or active? Of course, we don't want to be feeding sedentary kids like they're active, or we'll be overfeeding. And vice versa, you don't want to feed active kids like they're sedentary, or you'll be underfeeding. As far as meal patterning goes, myplate.gov/kids also has individual calorie levels. Okay, different calorie levels, and then it shows you how to put together meals. So, a lot of parents will say, oh, your kid needs 1,400 calories a day. Well, if you're like the typical American, you don't know what that means. Okay, but if you look at the meal pattern, it's kind of eye-opening, because a lot of parents would recognize that their kids don't eat this way. So let's take 1,400 calories as the example here. Okay? A kid on a 1,400 calorie meal pattern would need to be getting about 1.5 cups of fruit a day. We prefer that to be fresh fruit. We'll talk about juice momentarily, but kids really don't need juice. Okay, parents sometimes need juice to keep the kids quiet, but the kids don't actually need the juice. Okay? Vegetables, 1.5 cups a day. Grains, the equivalent of 5 ounces. Remember, a slice of bread is about 1 ounce. Okay, so 5 of those, and preferably mostly whole grains if possible. Meat and legumes, about 4 ounces. The size of the palm of your hand is 3 ounces. So kids don't need a ton of meat. Okay? If they do eat meat, small amounts will help them meet their needs. There's also a lot of really good plant-based sources of protein that kids can eat too. Milk, you might be surprised that the 1,400 calorie level tops off at 2 cups. A lot of parents think kids need 5, 6, 7 cups of milk a day. And you'll learn in today's lecture that they really don't. Milk, we know, is low in iron. Okay? And iron deficiency is a huge problem in little kids. Iron is tied to their cognitive development. If you drink a lot of milk, it fills you up and you don't have room to eat other iron-rich foods. But you'll also see when we talk about vitamin D that the amount of vitamin D recommended a day is 400 IUs. And every cup of milk has 100 IUs. So if kids are following this pattern, or the parents are, and giving a kid 2 cups of milk a day, that's only 200 IUs. That's just half of the 400 a day that they need. And that's a big gap that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that you fill with supplements. You actually give kids vitamin D droplets. We'll talk more about vitamin D in a subsequent lecture. And then there's a little bit of room for oil or added fats in a kid's diet, but really not that much. And so if you go onto that website, myplate.gov/kids, you can look up more information, lots of really good resources. If you work at all with kids in either church groups or after-school programs or even in your own kid's classroom, there's some great resources on that page for trying to help make learning about nutrition fun for both the kids, but also easy to understand for the parents. So what about snacks for kids? Okay, a lot of parents think, like a lot of adults in this country, that snacks are things that come out of a vending machine and out of a plastic or paper bag. Okay, and really, if you notice from the different types of snacks you see posted on this slide, snacks for kids should really just be smaller versions of the same types of meals that adults eat. Okay? You don't need to make specialized kids snacks. There's actually been a movement away from a lot of the typical foods that you see on a kid's menu at a restaurant. You think about it, if you walk into a Chili's or you walk into another kind of casual chain restaurant, the types of foods you traditionally see on the kids menu are very unhealthy, right? You've got chicken nuggets and pizza and usually, white pasta with just red sauce on it. And kind of perpetuating this myth that kids need to eat special, unhealthy, and certainly bland-colored foods. And that's not true at all. Okay, some of the more progressive chains are moving towards healthier options for kids that mirror a lot of the things that adults eat. And when we talk about some of the child feeding strategies, one of the things you might be surprised to learn is that parents should not short order cook for their kids. Okay? If you make a meal for the adults and then a separate meal for the kids, it's totally different foods, the kids start to grow up with the idea that they can demand special foods or they don't have to eat the same foods that adults eat, and that leads to unhealthful relationship with food down the road. Juice, as I mentioned, should be limited in kids. Okay? Juice is great if you're underweight. Same thing if you're an adult. If you're a high school boy having trouble keeping weight on, or a little old lady trying to gain weight, go for juice. Okay? Juice will pack in the calories in between meals. But for the rest of the world, okay, you don't need juice, especially for kids. Okay? If you do need juice to get your kids to drink water, then you do mostly water with a little bit of juice. Too much juice, we know, is tied to childhood obesity, and also it can cause diarrhea. So remember, even though it's 100% fruit juice, that's still a very concentrated source of sugar. It kind of runs through the kids' systems pretty quickly. It also is linked to increased risk of dental caries. Kids should be actually discouraged from walking around with anything in their cups that contain sugar, be it milk or juice. Again, even though that's naturally occurring sugar, the lactose in the milk, it's still, if it sits on the teeth all day, can promote proliferation of the bacteria that can degrade the enamel. So we want to encourage our kids, just like adults, to eat their fruit, not to drink it. Of course, because you get the benefits of fiber in the real fruit that you don't in the juice as well. When it comes to childhood feeding, okay, one of the best known experts is a lady named Ellen Satter. So on your computer, I'd like you to pull up her page, and it's ellensatterinstitute.org. And that's ELLYN satterinstitute.org. Ellen Satter is one of the most well-known child feeding experts. She's kind of in the latter stages of her career, but for many decades she was well known for books that she wrote like How to Get Your Kids to Eat But Not Too Much, Secrets of Feeding a Healthy Family. Okay? And Ellen has what she calls the division of responsibility. So if you go under the How to Feed tab and click on division of responsibility, we'll look at Ellen Satter's division of responsibility in feeding, because we're talking about childhood feeding today. And basically, when we talk about the division of responsibility for toddlers through adolescence, Ellen Satter's division of responsibility says this, that parents are responsible for determining what kids eat, when they eat, and where they eat. But that children ultimately determine how much and whether or not they eat. Now this really flies in the face of some of the prior thought, which was, well, we should just encourage kids to eat everything on their plate, and that's what will make a healthy eater. And Ellen Satter's work shows us that that's actually not a preferable method. Because if you force a kid to eat everything on his or her plate, you're teaching that kid to override their satiety mechanism. Kids and babies inherently know when they're full. Okay, babies will turn their head away from the breast or the bottle. Little kids in a high chair will push back or shake their head when they don't want food anymore. We as adults have spent decades learning how to ignore those messages from our body and to continue eating even beyond fullness. And so part of the concepts of this whole approach called intuitive eating is helping adults who struggle with food to reconnect with their hunger and satiety cues. Basically to retrain yourself the way you were when you were a baby, which was you knew when you were hungry and you got food, and you knew when you were full and you stopped eating food. Okay? So Ellen Satter says, yeah, parents do play a big role in determining what the kids eat. You got to pick healthy foods. Okay? When they eat, that there's specific set meal times. Okay? There's a start and a stop. And where they eat. You don't eat roaming around on the playground or in front of the TV. It's sitting down at a table where the concentration is on the food. Okay? That's the parent's responsibility, but the kids should determine how much they eat and whether or not they eat it. And you'll read in your text, but it takes almost 15 times to introduce a food to a kid before he or she will accept it. So you can't just try broccoli once and say, oh, my kid doesn't like it. You have to try it 15 different times until they'll be more likely to accept it. Okay, so on this website at ellensatterinstitute.org, you can see a lot more about childhood feeding. If you click on underneath how to feed, okay, the first one, how to feed children. Okay, let's take a look at, for example, 11 to 36 months, feeding your toddler. A lot of this is stuff that's derived from her books, but she has really good suggestions for parents for how to, just some common sense recommendations for how to get your kids to eat healthfully and not be a picky eater. Okay, there's a recommendation to have 3 meals a day at set times and eat with your kid. Don't just feed him or her. offer sit-down snacks every 2 to 3 hours between meals. Okay, so sitting down as opposed to grazing or roaming around. We know that grazing is tied to future unhealthy food practices. Even though the kid will be skeptical of food that she hasn't eaten enthusiastically before, do not short order cook or limit the number of foods that the kid is offered. Okay. Let the kid eat her own way, using fingers or utensils, fast or slow, much or little, 1 or 2 foods at a time. And then most importantly is the last bullet point here, which is say no when the child begs for food or drinks between meal times, except for water. The kid should always be able to have access to water if that's what they want, but they should know that there's set meal times for eating meals and snacks throughout the day. Okay, so that's Ellen Satter, and she has the division of responsibility theory. The last concept that we're going to talk about today is the BMI for age. Okay? And the BMI for age is how we determine weight status for kids. Now, this is a little bit different than how we do it for adults. BMI stands for Body Mass Index, and we're going to do some calculations today together. So, on your computers, if you can pull up Pediatric BMI Calculator. It's a good one on the CDC website. So get your Pediatric BMI Calculator pulled up. And also, take a look at the BMI for age chart. Okay, this is for girls. The chart that you can download is 2 to 20-year-old for girls. We're going to do a girls sample today. Okay, there's also a separate chart for boys. Okay, body mass index for age percentiles. So I'll just start by introducing what we do for adults to explain how it's different for determining BMI for kids. Okay? For adults to determine the BMI, it's listed in the second bullet point here. Okay? You have to know someone's height and their weight. Okay? The actual equation is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in centimeters squared. Or is it meters squared? Meters squared. Oh, if you do centimeters squared, it's times 10,000. But since we use pounds and inches, you can figure out your own BMI with a calculator by dividing your weight in pounds divided by your height in inches squared and multiply that times 703. Or you can just do an online calculator. Okay? And we'll learn more about calculating adult BMI later in the course. Okay? For adults, you calculate a BMI and boom, your BMI number tells you what weight category you're in. You're either underweight, healthy weight, overweight, or obese. Okay? With kids, there's an additional step, and that's what we're going to learn about today. With kids, you first calculate what their BMI is, okay? But then you have to plot it on one of these charts, like you guys are looking at, the BMI for age percentile chart. Okay? And if you look closely at that chart, on the x-axis at the bottom is the kid's age, and on the y-axis is their BMI. Okay? So let's do it. We'll go to a childhood, okay, you probably already have this up, but pediatric BMI calculator. The child and teen BMI calculator. Okay, and let's say that we're working with a kid who's 6 years old. Okay, so let's say their birthday is April 1st, 2008. Okay, and then we're measuring it maybe on April 8th, 2014. Okay, and let's say we're looking at a girl. So we're looking at a 6-year-old girl. Okay, who's 3 foot, let's say 9 inches, and weighs 56 pounds. Okay. So if you push calculate, okay, this calculator will automatically tell you that her BMI is 19.4. Now, what does 19.4 mean? It doesn't really mean anything until you look at it on the chart. So what I want you to do is on the x-axis, find 6, because the girl's 6 years old, and then go up until you meet 19.4, or 19, right above 19. Now, if you'll notice, if you plot it at 19.4, you're above the top line. Track that top line all the way out to the right, and you'll see that that's the 95th percentile line. Okay? The girl in this case is technically in the 96th percentile, which means if you put 100 6-year-olds in a room, okay, she is heavier than 95 of them. And what does that mean? Well, if we go back to the slide, if you see that someone is in greater than the 95th percentile, she's categorized as being obese. So in her medical record, it would state this child is obese. And at that point, it would be incumbent upon the practitioner to talk to the parents about why is the child obese? Okay, is it genetic? Could be, but unlikely. Is it environmental? Lots of soda, lots of candy. Is it lack of activity? Too much time in front of screens, video games, etc. Greater than the 95th percentile is obese. 85th to the 95th percentile is overweight. And then 5th to 85th percentile is healthy weight. So if you look on your chart, you can see the 5th percentile line is the first one, all the way up to the 85th. If the kid falls anywhere in there, that's a healthy weight. And then if it's less than the 5th percentile, that's what we consider to be underweight. Okay, so that's how we track weight status for kids. It differs from adults in a number of ways. For adults, okay, it's just height and weight. Okay, and there's lots of limitations to that. Okay, it doesn't take into account your gender, your race, your activity level. If you look at Major League Football players, more than 90% of them are classified as being obese. But of course, with the exception of some 300-pound linemen, most football players, even though they might technically be in the BMI category of obese, are in significantly better shape than you or I in a healthy weight range would be. There are many limitations to using adult BMI, but the kids' BMI is pretty useful. Okay? First of all, it's age-specific, right? You track that girl compared to other 6-year-olds, not other 16-year-olds, other 6-year-olds. And it's gender-specific. You looked at a chart that was just for girls. There's one of these charts that's for boys as well. Okay? And we'll revisit this when we learn about nutrition during adolescence, because note that this is for 2 to 20-year-olds. A lot of adolescent stuff ends at 18, but for BMI it actually goes up until age 20. And you might also know that this is from the Centers for Disease Control. This is a United States government agency. Okay, these are remarkably different charts than you would see in the developing world. The developing world uses the World Health Organization charts. Okay, frankly, their kids are a lot less fat than the kids in the United States. So there's a whole different set of standards. But to figure out what weight category a kid is in, we first calculate the BMI, and you can do that using a calculator or with that equation, and then we plot it against the chart that you see here.